Hello and welcome to the dark side. We are here this evening to discuss all things news and to bring you some educational information and to ensure that you are up to date with your history, knowledge, anti-racism work and more. And so we are happy that you are joining us this evening. Please do remember always to leave your comments, to give us feedback, to ask questions. You know how much we love to hear from you and interact with you. I am just going to adjust the status. There you go. Thank you very much. So that's gone on so that I can see you. And I'm just going to go onto Facebook and make sure that it's all open so that we can see all your comments. Oh, no, here it is. To Facebook and make sure that
Why
it's
is
all
it
open
giving me?
so that we can see all your comments. It's giving me myself on feedback loop. That's not what you want, is it? No. Edit privacy. There we go. It is on public. So now we should be able to see all your comments and be able to have your feedback. All right, so we're going to get straight into it this evening. We are going to be discussing some news stories, and then we're going to be heading into our main story, which, as you can see from the comment section or for the banner section, for those of you who are watching along, is on a story out of Kenya. And so let's dig into today's stuff. I had two stories planned, and then I remembered all the other stories I had planned, so I ditched them. But if you're interested, you might want to check out, just for your own education, just to keep you up to date, check out the Brexit plans that are still happening. The protocol is set to be broken in law in the UK. It is causing an uproar because it's breaking international law. It beggars belief. You know, you have to read the full story. You know, you might have to know something about Northern Irish and Irish politics, and you know, even just a cursory knowledge of the island, and how it is split into two, and the fact that there is water around it and it's separated from the UK, and the fact that one is in Europe and the other one is not in Europe, will show you that there are some challenges. But it's an interesting read, and knowing that the UK are about to break international law again, the latest story will not surprise you. Like, oh, they just do this as regular behavior for them. Yeah. Another one to look out for, if you want to look up another news story, is out of the Netherlands. The Dutch Prime Minister has been forced to apologize. He has chosen to apologize to one of the Royal Battalions here, the Royal Battalion 3. And it's basically related to the war in Bosnia. And it was related to the fact that they didn't equip their military there, let them down, and basically it led to 8,000 Muslims being massacred, 8,000 Muslim men being massacred, killed, buried in mass graves, etc., etc. Horrible story, but well worth for your understanding, to keep up to date with what is happening within European politics and what is going on. So that's just a quick one. But the three news stories that we have for you today that I really want to dig into. The first one is the baby milk formula crisis in the US. I didn't think this story could get any more interesting or, you know, newsworthy or have any more dimension that we're going to do it on, like, because, you know, of course, we're here to educate you. We're here to bring new information to you. But this particular aspect really caught my attention, so I wanted to give it a second shot. So effectively, the US is running a monopoly, a racketeering system. So forgive me, I'm going to just give you the short version. So, of course, we all know that the milk crisis, the baby milk formula crisis is happening. And it's not because there isn't enough baby milk formula in the world. It's that there is a problem with the two biggest suppliers of baby milk formula in the USA. And because of that, they control 80% of the market. That is a monopoly. For those of you who have not studied business, that is called a monopoly, and it basically means you have you control the entire market. It makes it almost impossible for any smaller players to ever enter the market. But here's where the rubber meets the road. So they control 80%. They run into problems. And so the president has to have this emergency legislation put in place. And he waives the FDA ban. I did not know there was a ban on European baby milk formula. There's a ban in the USA on European baby milk formula. The FDA says that it doesn't meet the FDA strict rules, and therefore it can't come into the USA. but Europe has a lot stricter food laws than the Americans. That's why we can have very little USA food here, because it doesn't actually meet oftentimes human standard. How is it possible that you're saying that it's the other way around? How is this possible? It's possible because you have a monopoly, and the two largest companies are actually forcing the hand of the FDA effectively and setting their own terms. And there are a number of cases at the moment against the FDA as it pertains to baby food, as it pertains to cosmetics and all sorts of other things. But interestingly, baby food, in which they are saying that the standard that the FDA have set is not high enough. But you've banned European baby formula. So are you interested in the safety of babies in the USA, or are you interested in the businesses that work there? And if you're interested in the businesses that work there, then you are not truly a capitalist society, because, you know, this idea that the market gets to run it would mean that those businesses that have actually gone out of stock, etc., for the baby milk, would be replaced by those companies that could get their products there. Should it not be that you were running some kind of racketeering system? I see this. My baby has 1 month before his roti diet begins.
Listen, can I just say roti before breast milk?
Say this again?
I said roti before breast milk.
Roti before breast milk. Honestly, you people are terrible. So what I decided to do was I decided to actually look up the list of ingredients in a UK European formula, baby formula, that we have here in Europe, and to look at the difference that it is in the United States. And I have to be honest with you, some of the differences are negligible. You can't see it, but the lists are definitely more explanatory in the UK European basis than they are in the USA. I get so much more information about allergens, about what type of products are being used, about if it actually meets the standards. If I have, let's say it has fish oil in it, what type of fish oil, is it going to be okay for kosher eaters, let's say, than I do on the back of a USA product. And I found that quite interesting, because I thought, let me just look up the information. I mean, I'm not, you know, maybe the USA is much stricter when it comes to baby. Maybe that's true. It's not true. So I think what's interesting is that, of course, the parents and hospitals and everything's being told this is in the best interest of babies, but the companies are not being held to a higher standard as a result of this. They've actually lowered the standard and the quality of the milk that's being produced there, and then refusing the better quality stuff to come in. And over the years, this is hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of product is being seized at borders, taken away, thrown away, etc., etc., etc. Yeah, they don't love you out there. They don't love you.
Here's the thing. It's not about food quality. If it was, then somebody needs to explain to me why it is acceptable to waive, you know, the FDA's prohibition on European baby formula. Because if that's the case, then surely you all should be up in arms regarding the fact that they want to give you things that aren't fit for consumption.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But it's not about whether it's fit for consumption or not.
No, it's not.
Right? It's about protecting the monopoly. And here's the other thing. I think that, you know, as you pointed out, it shows that you're not living in a capitalistic society, because in the failure to provide the services and failure to provide the goods, then the customers, the consumers, should dictate what happens next, which would lead to these companies pretty much going out of business.
Right.
Because everybody else would spend their money elsewhere. Right.
They would be able to import perfectly safe products from, we're not talking about illegally found products, we're talking about perfectly safe products that are on the general market in Europe, would be able to start selling in the USA.
Right. So I think one of the things that people need to start waking up to is, look, the reality is the FDA is not there to protect your best interest. And in fact, if I recall correctly, don't they have a large part to play in the opiate crisis that's taking part in the US right now? Because they approve things. I think to say that they approve things erroneously would be very kind to them.
Yeah, have you watched? Oh, you didn't watch it. I watched that docu-series. I don't know if it's not a real docu-series. That was on yeah. Oh goodness, it was horrific. The lobbying that pharmaceutical companies, the lying that they do, the whole work, and the fact that the FDA just buys it, like just goes, okay, well, I'm sure it will be fine.
The FDA buys it, or the FDA was bought? I just want some clarification on that right there.
Yes. Well, I mean, Dana brings up a really interesting point. 80% is a monopoly, and in the UK and in Europe, we have rules against monopoly. So we have laws in place to actually stop monopolies because it's not fair play. So it's really interesting. So we have, and there are problems with that, and there are challenges with our legal. There are challenges with some larger companies, of course, always. But the idea of having fair trade is really important to the kind of European ethos and market of how capitalism works here versus the USA system, in which they say it's completely capitalistic. But of course, if you have the governing body for food basically acting as a barrier to entry, which is what they said happens with baby food formula, particularly, the FDA acts as a barrier to entry to the market. So even if you have a US-based producer who's gone through all of the loops, they make it almost impossible for you to be registered as a baby formula provider. Listen, so that's why they own for 80% of the share, because that 20% is almost impossible to get through.
There is a way.
What is that? Crazy.
There is a way to have European baby formulas approved.
Say that again.
There is a way to have European baby formulas approved by the US government and the FDA. Yeah, money is one way, but there's another way. What they could do is they could turn around and market it as a health supplement that prevents abortions. And I bet you any money that thing will be made legal real quick.
I don't know how. I was holding my breath, but that's where we went. All right, so let's get on to our next story for today. A story. Sorry that we're busting your head, Daniel. We're the dark side. I don't know what to say. Thank you for joining us. We're really glad you come over here. But a story that we've also covered before was the SBC sexual abuse case.
We did this last week, actually.
Was it last week?
I think
okay. So within a week, we've gone from them having the report released to
the report was done a couple of weeks ago. Only got
and so they've had their members meeting, and what they have done is the task force has put forward some recommendations, and those recommendations have been accepted and passed. And I think it does bear saying, to the credit, the people who worked really hard on this sought permission from the victims who have been campaigning for decades to use their actual names and to issue a public apology to the actual people in which they had failed. And I think they did that, and they said to countless others who didn't give permission. So they actually didn't just, we apologize generally to, and they also didn't print people's names who didn't want their names to be printed, but they apologized publicly to those people. And I think that was a really great, it's a really good step. Having said that, there's always a having said that. We're on the dark side. There's always a having said that. The actual chair of the SBC Sexual Abuse Task Force is still unhappy with the amount of reform recommendations that were actually finally accepted. He thinks that it's the bare minimum. They need to go further and higher and do more. There is a tension within the SBC to do with their independence as each individual church and the organization's role in oversight. And so they're voluntarily in the oversight role. And that tension does lead to these questions of how do they implement it. I think that this is I disagree that there's a tension there. I think this is a safeguarding issue, and safeguarding issues work very differently to oversight issues. And therefore, I don't see that, especially when you consider that very week they were also discussing the case of the Saddleback Church, which is Rick Warren's church, who ordained 3 women pastors within the last year. Go Rick Warren. He put his stamp, he put his blessings where his mouth was, so to speak, and he stood by his theology and he ordained 3 women pastors. Well done. And the SBC had to decide whether to kick him out of the Sisterhood of Churches. So it's quite interesting that you can have that discussion because, you know, you prayed for a woman, but the discussion as to whether abusers can be kicked out, it's not held to the same value in some ways. You know, it is and it's not. And so there's a real tension there for the SBC. But I do think that what they said in their apology, well done. How they've acted and followed the instructions. Yes, Bruce Frank thinks it's the bare minimum, and it may well be, but it's a bare minimum more. And they agreed that it was a first step and that they're going to review it every session. So good for them. Like, at least they're doing it. How many other denominations can say that they actually are doing that and moving forward? Mr. Storm.
Yeah, similar thoughts to you on this. You've done the bare minimum, but it's a step in the right direction. And the fact that you have owned up, admitted, and are facing your wrongdoings and can apologize for it is a lot better and a lot more than some Christian denominations are able to do and have done thus far. So I think you deserve some credit for having the courage to step out and do that. But I do believe they could have gone further.
Yes.
And this whole nonsense about independence of churches, I'm like, what are you talking about? The fact is, you have requirements for churches to become members.
Right.
Right? So safeguarding and protecting can be one of those requirements.
Those requirements, pure and simple.
It's not difficult.
No. And I think what's ironic is, of course, within that same session, you're discussing Rick Warren's church and the ordination of 3 women pastors. But hold on, wait. But I thought you don't oversee the local issues. I thought this wasn't this. You don't make those decisions. You somehow there's no tension. You can expel a whole entire church for this. For really? For praying over 3 women? Oh my, sorry.
They're not expelling Rick Warren. They get too much money from him.
Well, there is that. I don't think that, you know, and I think that that's something to actually note, you know, who is benefiting from the relationship between the SBC and Rick Warren. It's not Rick Warren. It's not Rick Warren. He's not benefiting. At this point, it is definitely the SBC because he gives them the credit or the validity in some way. He kind of gives them the good end of the theological circle. You know, he gives them that. You know, I can't think of
the work that he does lends some legitimacy.
Legitimacy. There you go. There you go. That's the word. Thank you very much for helping me out. Always good. Yeah, it's the fact you're discussing those 2 things in the very same meeting tells me that you're obviously not. There's more that you can do, and you just need to dig deep and do it. And hopefully, in the coming years, they will dig deep and do it, and this will be a turning point for the SBC. We hope. It would be nice if it was a turning point for all denominations, but I fear that we're going to be here discussing another denomination and another set of scandals.
Of course we are. They re-elected Ted.
Oh, I managed to get through almost a whole day without mentioning that. All right, so the next news story, the final news story before we dig into our main story of today, is actually a report out of the UK. It's called the White Report, White Review. The White Review report. It is about the systemic issues of physical and emotional abuse in gymnastics in the UK. Now, the reason that we're doing this story is because the reason we're doing this story is because it really is shocking that this was allowed to go on for such a long period of time, that these athletes are being abused effectively. So let me give you some information about it. The report has basically found, it was an independent investigation, and it basically found that the issues of physical emotional abuse within gymnastics in Britain were systemic. These aren't just localized one-off issues. This is a systemic problem within the entire industry, which sounds like the wrong word, but industry. It's a culture in British gymnastics, is what they've said. And so effectively, let's just tell you, what did the review find? It had 400 submissions, and it conducted it focused its attention only from 2008 to 2020. So just a 12-year window that it was looking at. So it was 400 submissions, including all 133 of their current and former gymnastics. It conducted 190 in-depth interviews. So this isn't just questionnaires, this is in-depth interviews. The findings are not pleasant. If you're easily squeamish, I would advise reading the report carefully and trying to avoid some of the more horrific parts. I will just give you an overview. More than 40% described physical abusive behavior towards gymnasts by coaches, including physical chastisement. I mean, this means they're hitting these girls, or hitting these gymnasts, girls and boys. Inappropriate training on injuries, overstretching to the point of distress, withholding food, water, and access to toilets. More than 50% reported an element of emotional abuse by coaches, such as swearing, name-calling, using of belittling language, gaslighting. 30 of the submissions included allegations of sexual abuse. Those were referred immediately to the police. They included sexual assault, sexual remarks, inappropriate touching, and kissing as a punishment. I'm sorry, what now? Okay, more than 20. It's just horrific. It's really horrific. More than 25% included references to excessive weight management. Well, they're already withholding food and doing all of those things. And so the tyranny of the scales, is what it's actually called, led to unnecessary weight management issues within the gymnasts. What are some examples? Some examples are horrific. I saw one young lady being interviewed, and she said that she fell in training because somebody wasn't spotting her correctly, and she was left. She was crying. She was in absolute agony, and she was left on the floor. She had to crawl to get her phone to call her dad. When her dad picked her up, took her to the hospital, she'd broken her foot in 3 or 4 places. I was like, what's going on? What is happening? What is actually going on in gymnastics? There are other things where elite gymnasts have been made to stand on beams for 2 hours because she was frightened to attempt to move. So they made her just stand there for 2 hours until she did it. Some of them have been strapped to the bars to ensure that they would stretch properly. I can't even understand a reason you would need to do that. There have been refused toilet breaks, not allowed breaks altogether. One gymnast was deliberately dropped from equipment and dragged across the gym floor by her arms, while others were forced to train on broken limbs and injuries. It goes on and on and on. And so there are lots of recommendations that this report makes. What's interesting is that they expect to have them all implemented between 12 and 24 months. 12 and 24 months. Now, we've talked a lot about these reports that have been done into different issues, and there is never a point at which you hear this if they're not implemented within 12 to 24 months, there are going to be even more systemic problems like the whole shutting down, defunding, da 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 da. We talked about reports not too long ago that don't even have that stipulation. I mean, it is horrendous. The governing body, British Gymnastics, must have a fit for purpose case management system. They currently don't have a fit for purpose case management system. No one should be surprised about that. The club owners and managers should have mandatory safeguarding training. High performance gymnasts should have access to independent disclosure services and dedicated independent welfare officers. It makes you think of all the times that, to me, this reminds me so much of the report that we did for Child X. Was it Child X?
Yeah.
Child X, where talking about this independent welfare officers for children is so important. And in that case, of course, they were like, "Oh, just send some police in." No, welfare officers. Do you understand the words that are being used? The difference in what is needed to look after children when adults fail, and in this case, systemically have failed. So this story really just kind of took me back to so many reports that we've done here and looks at the systemic failures of the British systems to deal with race, gender, abuse of all sorts. It's not just on one level. It goes across and cuts across the field. Any thoughts before we head off to our main story?
Yeah. Look, is anyone really surprised by this?
No.
Right? You've got Larry Nasser in the US.
Mm-hmm.
And if anyone thinks that Larry Nasser was an outlier or, an exception, oh no, that is the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
And I assure you, the UK has similar issues, and most gymnastic programs around the world are going to have similar issues. They are an easy breeding ground for sexual predators, pedophiles, and it's an easy environment for abuse to go unchecked.
Yeah.
As I said, like half those coaches look like bullfrogs. The idea that kissing one of them will be punishment, I can understand. In fact, I go as far as to say torture. Besides the fact that it's sexual abuse and
it's pedophilia.
Yeah, right.
I mean, these are adults. These are not. Like what?
No. But I think one of the things that, and I think when we come to the main story, we'll be looking at, or we may touch on, depending on time, is also reminiscent in this story. For decades now, the US, the UK, European nations have been pointing at Russia and their gymnastic programs and talking about the abuse of gymnasts under their system. But you see exactly the same things happening in Western gymnastic programs. So for me, it speaks more to the culture, the global culture of gymnastics, more than any individual program itself. So Daniel has asked, what can parents do? Listen, all I can say is if I had taken my child to hospital and they told me in a story they broke their foot, had to crawl and to get their phone to call me, I go straight back to that place where the coach is, and it's gonna be a straight tiger uppercut, right? All you hear is tiger, tiger, tiger uppercut, because I gonna be laying a coach out cold.
No, I think it's a really great question about what can parents do. I think one of the things that we've learned across the field for after school activities generally, but gymnastics particularly, and things of that nature, where students are often pushing their boundaries, pushing their limits to ensure that they get to the top of the field that they are going. And that happens across a lot of sports. We had not too long ago the football scandal in the UK, where coaches were doing very similar behavior with young football players back then. And one of the things that I noticed the difference in, say, treatment is how involved are the parents? How involved can you have room to be? And this is one of the most challenging 21st century questions we have. The way that finances work, the way that we're up against it as parents financially, can you actually have the time dedicated to invest that time in holding your coaches and everything accountable? And I think that that's one of the ways that we see where a lot of this is falling in the gaps, where you have both parents working. And it's not because I'm blaming parents, but the question is asked, what can parents do? It is a challenge. You need to have someone independent of the coaches who is looking after your child's best interest, who's actually actively involved. And as parents, it's really, you're up against it, because if both parents are working and the kids are in an after school program and they're doing gymnastics, you know, they're at the mercy of these people. And as you say, letting your daughters know that they can talk to you, letting your children know that they can always tell you whatever's happening if someone's, but it's also wisdom from us to know, hold on, is this gone too far? Yes, the children are pushed. You see it in ballet, you see it in all kinds of sports and areas. Yes, they're pushed, but we also have to have wisdom to see where is the boundary that's being pushed here. Because what you're talking about is, you know, kids being tied to bars to help them stretch, tied, you know, made to stand on a beam for 2 hours. I'm like, no, that's not going to get my child to do that. I'm going to have to come in and speak to you and talk to you, or move the club, or do something to ensure that my child's well-being is being looked after. So I'm guessing tiger uppercut for our for the two fathers in the room. Happy Father's Day, by the way, to both of you. So for the two fathers, tiger uppercut. But I think on a wider level, that there has to be this welfare management system has to be put in place, because if parents are under the amount of pressure that they're under to be working long, excessive hours to pay for these lessons, but to pay for life, like life is expensive right now.
Yeah. And look, I think perhaps a solution, and it will be dependent on circumstances, but a possible solution is actually for the parents of a club or a class to get together and say, look, we come up with a schedule where one parent maintains or goes every week, and you put that on a schedule to make sure that nothing gets out of line, to observe, to make sure
report back to the group. This is what we're seeing.
Back to the group. If you have any concerns, you're able to report back to the group and say, this is what's going on. And even if it's a small group that gets together and do it, because not everyone wants to participate in a system like that, you know, it's about yes, it is, but it's that you get together and you have to get to know these parents, to know that they're safe and able to do it, but also to encourage your children to say to that adult that's there that week. So your children have to get to know the adult, so that they're comfortable enough to say to the adult that's present that week, I didn't like what happened, or this made me feel uncomfortable. I wasn't sure how to interpret what happened. And so that parent can then intercede and interject or give feedback to the adult if the child doesn't feel comfortable enough to do it. When I say the adult, I mean the child's parents.
Well, I love the way you phrase that question there, because I want to highlight that. I think that teaching our children across the board, and we have this at home with ours, I'm not sure if I'm interpreting this correctly. To ask just that question, this happened, and I'm not sure if I need to talk to you about it, but I'm going to tell you. And allowing them that language that they can come with anything, whatever it is, no matter how trivial or big or whatever, and they can just verify, Mum, is this right? Did I handle this correctly? Is this what it is? Am I supposed to tell you this stuff? You know, we've had these conversations within the last week. So I love that, teaching your children how to actually vocalize a situation. If you feel unsure, just ask your parents, and having the parents then respond with, okay, yeah, you can always bring that to me, that's no problem. Yes, you're not breaking anyone's confidence, or whatever it is that you're dealing with in that moment, you can have that conversation. But I think it is really important that children learn that they don't know where boundaries necessarily lie, and just double checking them is perfect. That's the best thing that a child can do, because as adults, I think we need to double check our boundaries too. Just saying.
I mean, but I think there's other things that you can possibly do. I mean, if parents don't have time, to do things like this, you can set up an email account where they can email anonymously any complaints, any concerns, or anything like that, or a box, something where they can make anonymous contact and feedback their concerns or thoughts or whatever else is going on. And then it can be actioned on that way. Because it's unfortunate, but a lot of children at that age don't have relationships with their parents in which they are comfortable enough to express these things. And I think the other problem is that also along with it is a lot of issues of guilt or shame when they have been the injured and wronged party.
Yep.
So something in which they are able to do things anonymously and could perhaps increase the chances and likelihood of feedback, and then preventing situations where you have to go and give someone a tiger uppercut or a tiger knee.
Well, there you go. This was some ideas that we have just to help you out. We don't always just provide the dark side of it. We can also look at solution-focused learning as well. But happy Father's Day to our fathers that are joining us today, including Mr. Storm. We are going to go to our main story today. Our main story is it comes to us from the relationship between Kenya, and I say relationship, but that you'll understand, the relationship between Kenya and the UK particularly. So I'm just going to give you some background, and then Mr. Storm's going to take it. Bear with us as we have to tell you some really interesting pieces. We should offer tiger uppercut classes just in case. Oh dear. Yes. Okay. So between the years 1895 and 1960, Kenyans were being forcibly removed from their land. This resulted in 1934. We're looking at one particular region called Kericho County. Forgive me, Kenyans, if I'm not saying that correctly. You can always help me out, put it in the comment section phonetically, and I will try and say it better. Kericho County. In 1934, more than 100 families were evicted by the British from their land. Their land was then seized. These people were moved to inhospitable places. Many died in those situations because the conditions that they were moved from and to did not match. So they had fertile lands that were producing their needs, and they were able to sell and harvest and do all of that, to places in which they had no schools, no medical aid, there was no support systems. There was often families were dying of malaria, women were miscarrying babies. It was the abuse that happened to these people was horrific. Many of them have died. There is a news story that you can watch on the BBC about this, and it focuses on one particular gentleman who's, you will see, has burn scars from where he was burned during this time, because he was dealing with an animal, and the person who, they basically sent them into slavery, and the person whose business it was slapped him so hard that it knocked him into fire, and obviously the resulting injuries is what he is left with. These conditions were awful. Now the governor there, Paul Chepkwony, I hope, again I'm apologizing, has had to form legal proceedings with the UN. He's formed legal proceedings with the UK governments. He has requested reparations from the Queen and apologies, because these lands were not only seized, but they were never sold. They were given to companies, which are now multinational companies selling tea, some of the tea that y'all be drinking today. And I'm a tea lover, so this hurts me in my soul that these companies are there. They have never paid for the land. They have never given reparations to these people. They just continue on making their money, treating their workers badly, not paying them fairly anyway, people whose land it is, not returning it to the people, and becoming very wealthy on the backs of the Kenyans, particularly within the Kericho County region, which is what it's looking at. This story does not bode well for the British. We have one comment that's coming already that says, wow, sounds like the Americans and the Native Americans. Yes, because the Americans were British. Before they were Americans, they were British, and they were Dutch, and they were French, and these are the ways that they behaved across the entire globe. So the story sounds very similar, because this is who they were before, and this is what they're doing now. They've learned very well to do this evil thing. And as I say, this particular period of what they're looking for is between 1895 and the 1960s is the period that they're trying to claim back and sort out the land. But this story goes way further back than this. And I think Mr. Storm's going to come in and begin to unpack a little bit of that history. But the one family that we were looking at was in 1934. But you're talking about, almost 70 years worth, 80 years worth of stealing land, forcibly removing people, sending them into shanties, and then having the audacity, the sheer audacity to look down on these people after they had fertile land and they had their own systems. And the reason you wanted their land is because they were actually good at what they were doing. But when you traumatize them by stealing their land, forcing them off of it, driving them out into places where they were abused, snakes, all kinds of things that they'd managed to deal with their land and get, work in harmony with their landscape. And you just send them off to start again in the unhospitable lands that you didn't want to go to, that you didn't want to pay for nothing. I mean, come on. And then you have the audacity to look down on this region and these people as if they are nothing and no one when you have stolen everything from them. The mind it boggles. Mr. Storm, let's bring you in.
Right. So, as you point out, the chief period that we're dealing with here is between 1895 and 1963. And I think, so the British Army forcibly removes, now I'm sorry, Kenyans, I'm going to butcher these people's names, but it was the Kipsigi and the Talai peoples off their land. And they did it, just as a point of correction to something you said earlier, they didn't give it to the multinationals and companies.
No.
They gave it to white settlers.
White settlers, intermediaries, who then sold it.
And the white settlers then sell it on to the national companies. But they forcibly removed these peoples from their lands and gave the land to white settlers so that they could grow tea, because tea at that time and even today is a very lucrative crop. Now, as you said, this was the county, Kericho County.
Mm-hmm.
And this area is actually one of the most fertile, and it is one of the most lucrative land areas in the whole continent of Africa.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Right? Yeah. Okay. So you have to understand this is prime land.
Prime fertile land, because I mean, you're talking about a continent, and one of the largest continents.
Okay. So when they kick off the Kipsigi and the Talai people, the Kipsigi and the Talai receive no compensation.
Nope.
Right? But they also have no course of redress.
Right.
They have nobody to appeal to and no process to appeal to for what is happening to them.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to make what is happening even more egregious. Okay. But as in what's happening today, even more egregious. So in 1902, 90,000 acres of land was stolen by something called the Crown Land Ordinance, and it was given to white settlers in 1902. Okay, and the majority of that land there is now in the hand of British or multinational tea companies.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when the Kenyan peoples brought complaints against the British government was given 60 days to respond to the accusations or the allegations. The British government stayed silent and did not engage with the process. So that should tell you how little regard they give to the Kenyan peoples. It's
Right.
not even worth a response.
Response, right.
Okay. So, now, some of the people in 1962 were given leave to return to their ancestral lands. Okay, in the Carrico County. The problem with this was, what were they returning to?
What land?
Right.
Where?
So they could go back to the area.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you have to understand is, Dana's absolutely right when she says it sounds like the Americans. The USA, the European settlers, and the Native Americans. She's
Yep.
absolutely right, because that is essentially what they did when they moved the Kipsugi and the Talai off of their land. They essentially moved them into reservations, right? They moved them into areas that were scarce in water and high in malaria.
Yeah.
Right.
No facilities, nothing.
Right. So they moved them to areas with lots of snakes, lions. It was essentially a jungle. There was nothing there at the time. Right. So they're given leave to return, or some of them are given leave to return in 1962, but they have nothing to return to. So the ones that did return are now living in a very small community, and have a guess at what it's called.
It's probably named after some coffee company or tea company.
No. It's worse than that.
Oh. It's named after the Queen?
No, it's worse than that.
Oh, God. Anyway, go on. Just tell us, because we can't go.
So the real, true inhabitants and owners of the land that have been allowed to return are now living on a patch of land called squatters' land.
Excuse you? You mean squatters? What do you mean squatters?
They have been.
They own the land. It's their land. We mean squatters. You are squatting. Come off the land.
Right.
Go along about your business. What do you mean?
So a lot of them are living in what they call cells, and these are dwellings, if you can call it that, that are 50 feet by 100 feet. Okay, so it's not big at all. And one person speaks of the fact that he shares this space with his 4 sons and their families.
Dear Jesus.
Right? But what makes this particularly egregious now is not only is the dwelling that he is living in, right? And he has returned to his ancestral land. But where his father previously owned over 100 acres, he is now living on 1/8 of an acre.
Teeth in Russia, people.
Right. Now, why I have a lot of issues with this is not just the fact that the act was done, but it is the response of the British government today. So first of all, they didn't want to engage with the process. But the British High Court has ruled that because the events happened so long ago, okay, that it wouldn't be possible to establish a fair trial. So, in other words, we're just going to we know the land was stolen, but we're just going to allow this injustice to continue. Now, here is why this is particularly egregious, and it starts off from where I started in the beginning. What were the dates I gave you?
19. Well, it's the same dates I gave. 1895, to 1963.
1963. All right. So I want you to bear in mind that people that were victims of this are still alive today.
Oh,
so
hello.
One of the first excuses given is that it happened so long ago. No, direct victims of this are still living today.
Yep.
That's problem number one.
Yep.
Number two, when did we say this went up till?
1963.
1963. I'm not sure if you're very versed or how well you remember dates. But when did World War II end?
Oh, no. Jesus, please don't ask me this question. Come on, comment section. Come to my aid. Come on now, people. Right, it's the
1948.
1948. Did I get it right?
Right. So, correct me if I'm wrong. Oh, 1945. Okay, 1945. I thought it was 1945 to 1948, but whatever. So, Dana, if it's 1945, thank you. Still, the point I want to make is I'm pretty sure that 1963 comes after 1945.
It's a very well-made point. We're all remembering World War II, and we're still honoring the veterans that worked there, and we're still doing all of those things that you're supposed to do.
Well,
1963 is a lot closer,
No, well, it's got nothing to do with the veterans. This actually has to do with the victims.
No, my point being, if you can remember the veterans, you can remember the victims, right? You can. It's really just a 1 + 1. If I know veterans from 1945, then I can definitely remember victims in 1963.
Well, the point I want to make is actually it's more than that. It's that there's a direct correlation here, and that is that victims of the Nazis are still entitled to claim compensation. And it was only earlier this year and it was in January of 2022, that the British government sent out information saying that they were going to begin the process of looking to close the ability of people to claim compensation for what the Nazis did. Right? Once again, 1963 comes after 1945. And it is only now you're talking about closing that process. So the fact is, there are still people that are able to make these claims, living victims that are able to make these claims, and you're not allowing them to. Now, I think the other problem with this is that the documents exist, the papers exist. The British government isn't even denying its actions in this, right? So the fact that you actually need a legal case or you need to go to court to get this compensation is particularly egregious, right? Because in order for a victim of the Nazis to claim compensation, they only need to apply to a panel. The compensation was already established. They already said this was wrong, so we're going to establish this compensation panel. But now, this just adds insult upon insult upon insult, because the British government is paying compensation for something that a foreign government did, but is refusing to pay compensation for something that it itself did.
As always, there is nothing surprises me. Nothing.
So I want to give you a few quotes because I don't want anybody that ever hears this to think that I am making this up, right?
Okay.
So,
I'm having an allergic reaction, people.
where is it?
Okay, while he finds the quotes, I am going to get something for my allergic reaction that's now really beginning to bother me. Hi, people. This is what we do here on the dark side. We just talk to you quite happily.
This is the EPCAP panel chairman, right? And the ECPAP is the Enemy Properties Claims Assessment Panel.
Okay.
And that's the UK panel that deals with assessing claims of people that said like their assets were taken or they suffer persecution from the Nazis, right? He says the EPCAP scheme has been a vitally important UK government initiative, providing the families of those who suffered Nazi persecution with the sense that at long last justice has been done. The suffering endured by their forebears has been recognized and closure achieved. I want to know why the Kenyans don't deserve the same thing.
And that's where I think people misunderstand when you're saying, if you can do it for this group, we just want the same over here. We're not asking you to take from them. We're asking you for the same good treatment you gave this group that were discriminated, that were proven to have gone through horrificness and blah, blah, blah. To do the same for this group right here, this nation of people, these two nations of people, these two tribes of people, these two nations, can you please do the same? It is proven and documented what you have done. Do the same.
Right? So he goes on to say the overwhelming majority of the original owners of the assets concerned have, of course, now died, and very few new claims are being received. We therefore believe that it is an appropriate time to consult on closing the schemes while allowing for new claims to still be received up to the date of actual closure.
It's ridiculous. It's
Right?
it's just incensing because you see there are live stories. As you say, this was 1963. One of the people that I saw a story from was from 1934. And this gentleman had been to hell and back, like literally to hell and back. Proven this is his life. It's not your country. You had no rights to be there in the first. You were not get off these people's land. Not just repatriate them, give them back their ownership of their stuff, and then compensate them for the awful behavior that you have done. These multinational companies have made billions off the back, not only of these people's lands, but off of them as well. Because when you send them back to there, you can go back home to do what? Work for the multinational.
Right. So
work for the multinational. Are you just adding insult to injury?
Right.
Work for peanuts. Because remember, we have fair trade stuff going now because of their behavior.
So the business minister, British business minister Paul Scully, says these schemes, universally recognized as among the most generous to operate worldwide, have offered hundreds of people rightful compensation for the horrors they faced during the Second World War at the hands of Nazis and other totalitarian oppressors. I want to know which part of the description of totalitarian oppressor does the British government not meet in what they did to the Kipsugi and the Talai peoples? Because they were offered no way to redress what was done to them. Mm-hmm, they were brutally and forcefully moved by the British Army. They had no say in their governance. So I would like to know which part of that description do they not meet? And then if that's the case, why are they not eligible for a similar scheme?
Yeah.
You're so proud of it.
So proud, so proud. And you know, the worst thing about that is I'm sure if we speak to the community with which it affects, the minority of people that actually got to benefit would tell you that there are problems with how it was implemented.
Right?
Bet you anything.
I'm
But
sure they would.
you're so proud. You're
But
so proud
here's
to
the thing.
put yourself forward as leading the way in these things. And on the other hand, you're going to turn around and teach to treat these Kenyan people horrific.
Yeah.
You know, for
So
me, the thing that really strikes me, which you haven't brought up yet, I'm not sure if you're going to bring up, is the UN interventions that have happened since then, trying to get the British to actually come to the table and deal with this issue. And again, the British are accused of breaking international law by not abiding by UN agreements, by not abiding by the work that the UN have done to redress this issue after it was brought to them by the governors of the region. And so for me, this is where you see a systemic failure in the government of the UK, where they do not honour international law. They
no,
don't.
They don't. But I think actually I would say this is a systemic failing of Western nations, full stop. And the powerful nations, and the richer nations tend to typically be the Western nations. And they're typically richer because of stories like this. But what I would want to draw parallels between is, why is Britain not suffering economic sanctions, but Zimbabwe did?
Now that's a whole, you could open a can of worms and we're over the hour. Like, come on now.
No,
We're gonna let them marinate on that question.
No, but it's a legitimate question, I believe, because when white farmers were kicked out of Zimbabwe,
oh yeah,
Britain got up in arms and said this is wrong, and
yeah.
wanted to place economic sanctions
Oh yeah.
in Zimbabwe. But we are talking about you doing exactly the same thing.
Well, no, you're doing it worse because you went into someone else's country and evicted them.
Well, yes.
Zimbabweans are in their own country dealing with their own mess. Like that's the mess that you imposed on them, by the way. But anyway, we'll leave that point aside. But they're in their own country. You actually left your country, took your army, went to someone else's country, not a neighboring country of yours, we might add, but a country far, far, far away from you, and decided that that was your land too, and you were going to just do whatever you wanted to those people.
Right. And so I look at this, and for me, as I said, this story brings together so many things that we talk about on the dark side. It brings together colonialism, brings together racism, because we're looking at the injustice in how the compensationary schemes are established, and all of these things. But I look at this, and for me, it is further evidence of how colonialism never died.
Yeah.
Right? The white people may have left the African countries, but you took control of the resources.
Yep.
So your presence isn't actually there. You don't have your governor still staying there making the rules. But you still own and control all of the resources. And essentially, that was all you were interested in anyway. Right? And so for me, it's how, when we talk about independence, and people talk about, or you have people like the 45th president of the United States who refers to these countries as shithole countries. Right? You're not acknowledging that you created the mess and are still perpetuating the problems. You're not allowing the people to take back control of their own destinies, because you're still controlling all the wealth and resources of the country. And imagine what would happen to Kenya if they went and did a Zimbabwe.
Can you imagine if they kicked out those multinationals? Can you imagine the backlash that they would receive? Can you imagine if they said, you know what, we're closing our doors to you today?
Let's put it like this. Let's put it like this. Let's put it like this. The European countries and the US, right? They ain't put boots in the ground in Ukraine yet. But if those multinationals got kicked out, I promise you there will be boots on the ground in Kenya.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But you know what's even worse is they do it. We saw this. Oh, I wish I could remember which African nation it was now. Please, people who know this, you need to come in the comment section. So we saw this when they decided to boycott the product from the African nation. So when you then take control of it and say, actually, we don't want your multinationals there anymore, they're like, oh, well, we refuse to buy from you. So now what was a lucrative business that these people, it's not even about reparations now, paying backwards, it's about paying forwards. They refuse to buy the product, and therefore you then cripple the economy because you then leave the people even worse than they were before. It's like there is no winning in these situations unless the European countries decide to actually do the right thing. And thus far, every story we've reported on, they never do. Oh dear. Okay, so that's everywhere. She went to Dana went to Mexico last summer. She visited a silver mine. The Mexican government still can't have control of, as a Canadian company does. I mean, honestly, honest to my goodness, it's just everywhere. And saying, well, but they're not managing their stuff. What did you give them to manage? I mean, in the Kenyans' case, what did you literally give them to manage? Snakes and mosquitoes, because that's the area you sent them to. They came from an area that had hospitals, that had all the things that they had built up and put in place. And then you sent them to snakes and mosquitoes and wondered why the people weren't able to build again from scratch all by themselves. Oh, because you took what was theirs and left traumatized people being killed by the things that are in the environment.
Listen, here's the thing. I am a firm believer in the fact that we need stronger Pan-African ties between the governments and the nations, because they have enough resources to actually cripple the Western nations. Right? If they simply all said, look, you know what? We have nationalized this. You said you're not buying from our sister country. Fine. We're not exporting. And when you start talking about cobalt and all these other minerals that are necessary for telecommunication chips and all of this, right?
The whole world will grind to a halt, love.
It grinds to a halt. But the way that the system has been set up and established, you would need them to come together.
Yeah.
They would need to be unanimous, and they would need to be resolute in their stance and position in order to do that. But then, of course, you're going to have problems like France and how they are with their ex-colonies, and the fact that they already have armed troops on the ground. So you go to do that. France is like, okay, well, we'll just take over your country again.
We're just going to take over your country. We'll just take back the land again. It's not yours. It's not yours. It's horrific.
It's horrific. It's horrific, but it also makes a mockery of the accusations that they make against Putin.
It does, but I think, for me, deeper than that, there has to be a point of learning, because I've been sitting here. We do the dark side, of course, and we're coming up for our summer break soon. We have a few more episodes before we get there. And one of the things that it strikes me is that, yes, it makes a mockery of the way that they talk about Putin. Yes, of course, absolutely. But I think there's a deeper thing that as individuals and societies, we really need to wrestle with, which is we have inherited a really colonial mindset of the way that we look fundamentally at the value of humans and how we devalue humans. And when I look at the reason why we keep bringing these stories to this platform, and why we keep sharing them with people, is not to make you depressed, not to make you feel helpless, but actually to change your perspective of the people. Because in changing your perspective of the people and in giving value to those people, instead of buying into this idea, maybe they can't govern it, maybe they're not able. No. Let's not play those silly games. The intellect is there, the ability is there, the ingenuity is there. Every week there is a news story about how some young African person is changing the landscape of some industry through innovation and all of those things. Every week I've seen a story for like years now of this. All of those skills are there. What is not there is the respect of the world, because we've bought into the colonial mindset. So even things like returning their artwork, on the one hand, they're savages, and on the other hand, you're keeping all their artwork and you refuse to return it. Are they artists or are they not? Are they good enough? Like, you know, you have to restore the humanity of the people. If we don't restore the humanity of the people, we will never get to a place where, whether it's Putin or whether it's 45 or whether it's Boris Johnson or whether it's the Queen, whoever it is not held to account for this behavior. We need to hold them to account for this behavior.
Look, here's the thing. I don't care whether they can look after it or not. It's theirs. Let them do with it as they will. I don't care. And the reality is, you look at the UK, which is allowing fracking. You look at the US, which is allowing pollution of its waterways. Ain't nobody invading your country saying you can't take care of the land.
I mean, in the US's case, I feel like a double, kind of invasion might be good at this point. Poor soul.
Listen, I'm just saying that nobody is making those accusations.
No, no one is.
Nations. And for me, what you're looking at is white supremacy and white arrogance in regards to how they treat those from African, Caribbean, South American nations.
Asian
nations as well. As I said, it doesn't matter whether you feel people can look after it or not. It's theirs to do with as they please. So, yeah.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I think it's really, I hope that when, we have all of our lovely viewers and supporters, and we thank you for coming along, but I really do hope that the point is being driven home is that the humanity of the people needs to be restored. That the reason you learn about these stories is so that you don't take a default position which dehumanizes and further pushes the point that they shouldn't have access or they shouldn't have rights or their land isn't their own. Where you buy your tea is important. Where you buy your stuff, how you actually shop and move in the world is important. It all makes sense. But fundamentally, if you don't see them as human in the first place and believe you have a right to question their destiny and say, oh yeah, but can they? It's not your right to ask that question. As Storm says, the right is theirs to self-determination. Whether you agree with their choices or not isn't your issue. If you disagree with choices, look to your own government. Look in your own country. There are 1,000,001 issues we cover in Western nations, so-called Western nations, that is problematic. Every week we have a different case. There are more than enough to keep you occupied in your own country. Go ahead, fix those. If you have to ask questions about whether someone is capable, look in your own system. I guarantee you they aren't capable.
Well, I'm just going to say that the UK has been entrusted to Boris Johnson, and we can all see he is surely not capable.
Oh, we've ended on Boris Johnson. There you go. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us this Father's Day for our discussions here on the Dark Side. We are glad, we are grateful that you participate, that you talk with us. We really do appreciate all the feedback and the help and the discussion. It gives us an encouragement to continue what we're doing. Thank you, Mr. Storm, for educating us on this issue. I have to say I didn't know that much about the struggles of the Kenyan people, but it really is enlightening and it is helpful to understand what is happening and how devastating the effects of land grabbing, armies being sent into other countries to steal from people is.
Yeah. I'm just saying that there was a lot more that we could have gone into on this in regards to multinational companies, complaints about how multinational companies are structured so that legal cases cannot be brought against them. It's a whole bunch of mess.
Dark side. That's another dark side for another time. The whole multinational thing is the dark side of our world, I think, sometimes. So maybe we'll do that next time. But for now, thank you. God bless you. We will see you next week, 9 o'clock Central European time and whatever time you live in. Or we'll be catching up with you midweek as you watch whenever you can. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining. Mr. Storm, peace.
Deuces.
Bye, everyone. We'll see you soon. I've just realized I don't have the end thing in place, but I'm going to have it now.